Hey friends, today's lesson is on adaptation. I hope this finds you and your family well and adjusting to our current situation. Anyway, we've kind of had an adaptation going on in our educational system. And adaptation is a trait that kind of leads to better survival. And it has to be something that the organism had all along. So if you think about our educational system, we've always had technology. But with the change in our environment and all of us now working from home, that trait is maybe more important than it was before. So at the end of the lecture, you can decide that was a good analogy or not. So what is an adaptation then? Well, an adaptation has three characteristics. If you look at the animals that are on the side here, you can see obvious features they have that are unique to them and that would help in their survival. So the adaptation has to have these three characteristics. It is something an organism inherits. It's something that helps it to better compete and thus survive and reproduce. And it is important or specific to an environment. So for instance, little bird down here has a big old, mouth that is really good if you're diving from the sky into the ocean and gulping up fish. If suddenly the environment changed and this particular bird would have to pick seeds off the ground or something, then its current beak may not be an adaptation. So it has to match with a particular environment. My idea of a joke, we have this duck right here saying, I'm one of those species they describe as awkward on land. Again, the adaptation has to match the environment. Not all variations, though, are adaptations. And so we know that variation exists within a species. So if we looked at humans, we're different heights, we're different speeds if we're running. Some of us digest different foods better. For something then to be an adaptation, again, like we said on the previous slide, and what Darwin would say, is it has to benefit survival and reproduction so that a larger percentage of the next generation would then inherit that particular trait. So you might think of an adaptation as a positive variation. So let's look at these little hedgehog type critters. It would potentially be a guess that somewhere along the line, some of their hair follicles had some kind of a mutation. So instead of having regular hair, you have these super coarse little spiny things. Well, that's a pretty good defense mechanism, and so would benefit survival and reproduction. So in theory, over many generations, a larger percentage of them would have the little spiky spines versus having normal hair. So again, looking at variation as variety, adaptation as being a positive variation. Now, for my friend, the dog down here in the corner apparently had a encounter with such an animal. Not such a good thing. All right, adaptations evolve gradually. So we know that natural selection takes many, many generations and sometimes thousands and millions of years to make an effect on a species. But we want to know that natural selection uses the variation that's already there. It's not like an animal can go, ooh, it's cold out now, I wish I had thicker hair. And boom, it would have thicker hair. Nope. If that's a trait an organism now has, at some point in time, there were ones with thinner coats and ones with thicker coats. The ones with thicker coats survived, and so on down the line. So you want to know that natural selection doesn't cause the variation, but it uses the variation that already exists. We want to also know that adaptation doesn't end because we continually get new variations into a species through mutation of DNA. And if that mutation is helpful, well, it's going to survive and reproduce and pass that mutation on. In addition, if the environment changes, then different traits may be more important than others. And so as we look at climate change, we have concern for species that do not have enough variation within their species to survive a large change in temperature, in the amount of rain it gets, in the elevation of the oceans or whatever. Continuing on then, we want to know that adaptations can kind of be grouped into different kinds. And my guess is there's more categories than this, but these are the three that we're going to kind of use. First of all, you can have a structural adaptation. Please write down that that's a physical trait that something has. So the hoof of a horse, the beak of a bird, having a long neck, you can think of thousands of structural adaptations that different organisms have. The second classification is metabolic, and I would think of that as chemicals an organism can make. So we need to make different chemicals so that our blood clots. Snakes can make a certain chemical that's poisonous, and they can put that in their venom. Some of us can make enough lactase to digest the lactose in milk. Some of us do not. So there are many, many examples of chemicals within organisms that would fit as metabolic adaptations. The third category here is behavioral. And so the idea that birds know how and when to migrate, that squirrels know how and when to store nuts, you might think of those as actions. So behavioral adaptations are actions that organisms take in order to survive. Mating rituals would kind of fall into that same category. So just trying to look at some different beaks and feet and what they would provide in terms of a benefit. You can look at the different kinds of beaks here and see, okay, if I'm going to crack seeds, I got to have a strong jaw so that I can do that. If I'm a raptor and I'm going to tear meat off, again, that would be beneficial. And even different kinds of feet, whether or not it perches on a branch or it swims or it walks, you can see how these would make sense. I listed this, or I put this link at the end or in this folder, so if you want to look at some more birds, have at it. Your assignment for today is to pick an organism, open the file into a Google Doc, and study that organism and its adaptations. So basically in this space, I'm going to insert a picture of my organism. The only rule is no birds, no birds, no birds, no birds, because we just talked about birds. So pick some other organism. Over here, you want its scientific name. And these are things that have two words. They're often Greek and Latin. The first word will start with a capital letter. The second one will not. So simply look up like lion and scientific name, and it will give you what that is. If you continue to the bottom half, then what you want to do is look at your picture or research your organism and find 5 different adaptations that it has. And then what is it about that that's an advantage? So as we looked at the bird feet, with some, beaks are better for tearing meat. That would be a competitive advantage. And then based on the notes you took, is that a structural, a metabolic, or a behavioral adaptation? So you want to have 5 of those. Your organism can be an animal, it can be a plant. If you really know some things about bacteria or fungi, maybe you could do that as well. You see the rubric down here on the bottom? It says it lists at least, to get a 4, list at least 5 adaptations, include the photo and its scientific name. So that's the end of today's lesson. Let us know if you have questions. Thank you.